I am Lindsey Lockett. Welcome back to the Nourish Your Nervous System series of videos. This is video number 7 in the series. If you're just joining us, please hit pause on this video, go back to video number 1 and watch all of the videos before this one because each one builds on the last video, and that's very intentional. If you don't know who I am Lindsey Lockett. I am the host of the Holistic Trauma Healing Podcast. I'm also a trauma educator and a nervous system coach who specializes in complex PTSD. And this Nourish Your Nervous System video series is based off of my brand new book that's just been released. It is also called Nourish Your Nervous System, and you can get it as an instant download or an audiobook at lindseylockett.com/nourish or click the link below. In this 7th video in the series, I am going to be talking about nourishing ourselves from a spiritual perspective. And I know that talking about spirituality can feel really squirmy to people for all different kinds of reasons. And I get it. If the word spiritual is uncomfortable for you, during your lifetime, we have all likely had a negative experience with a spiritual group, a religion, or someone who claimed to be spiritual. Certainly, we've at least seen spiritual people online who are, really ungrounded and not embodied in their spirituality, and who use spirituality to bypass not only their own very real feelings and emotions, but also issues in the world. It's kind of a love and light approach, which I don't really vibe with myself. So I want to share with you some perspective on nourishing yourself spiritually in a way that is not bypassing of your own self or of the larger issues that are happening in the world. So even if during your lifetime you haven't had direct experience with a religious group, a spiritual group, or a spiritual person who you would say was problematic, I really hate that word. But there are stories all over the media about cults and religions indoctrinating people with all of these crazy beliefs. And just to give you an example, recently, my husband David and I finished 2 documentaries about the Twin Flames universe cult. And holy shit. If I hadn't been in the evangelical Christian church, which I consider a cult myself, and some of the crazy brainwashing stuff that I wholeheartedly believed in when I was in that religion, it would be really hard for me to watch documentaries like the Twin Flames universe cult and believe that people actually bought that stuff, but they do. So if anything about spirituality feels squirmy, uncomfortable, raises the hairs on the back of your neck, makes you want to turn off this video, I totally get it. I understand. And I'm going to encourage you to keep watching and just use your discernment. My own story involves many harmful experiences, as I said, from growing up in the evangelical Christian church. I grew up in the Bible Belt in Texas in the Southern Baptist Church. So that is about as conservative, as legalistic, as fundamentalist as you can get. For over 30 years, I lived in fundamentalist evangelical Christianity. I was in leadership positions in the evangelical church. I was even a pastor's wife, still married to the same guy, but we're not in ministry anymore. It was my life. Just like everyone else who becomes entrenched in a religion or a cult, I believed that it was the absolute truth, that I was right, and everyone else outside of my belief system was wrong. Yet, even in that superior way of thinking, I was being harmed by the very system that promised to save me. And I understand religious trauma. I definitely have some religious trauma. I have a couple of episodes on my podcast, Holistic Trauma Healing, that talk specifically about religious trauma, if that's something you're interested in. And about 9 years ago, I deconstructed and deconverted completely from Christianity, and I have 0 regrets. During my deconstruction period, which started around 2015 and was completed around 2017 for the most part, I toyed with the concept of atheism. For me, if the Christian God and Jesus weren't it, and I wasn't converting to a different religion, it was kind of like, what's the point? What's the point in even believing in God or in a higher power outside of myself? But when I considered atheism, I felt an emptiness in my body. There was a hole somewhere inside of me where my love, my trust, and my belief in the God of the Bible once existed, and it yearned to be filled. not with that, but with something. And that something, as far as my understanding is the divine, whatever the divine means for you. You know, when I was 8 years old in the Southern Baptist Church, I was at a vacation Bible school, and I was asked, along with a room full of other children, if you died tonight, do you know where you would go? And that experience still viscerally lives in my body as the first time I was ever really faced with my own mortality, and that there were options about where I would go after I died. And then conveniently, the preacher who asked, if you died tonight, do you know where you would go, also had the solution, which was, if you pray and ask Jesus into your heart, then you will definitely go to heaven. And if you live your life and you're devoted to him, and you try not to sin as much as possible, and you do what the Bible says, and you obey authority, and you obey God's word, then you will be saved. And at that time, that's truly what I believed was the truth. And nobody was telling me any different. No one was encouraging me to think critically or question anything, or come up with my own spiritual beliefs. It was very much about indoctrination and control, fear, brainwashing, all under the cloak of God and Jesus's love. It isn't really nourishing to tell an 8-year-old that if she died, that she would go to hell if she didn't invite Jesus into her heart. It's not very nourishing to tell an 8-year-old that you are supposed to trust a God who is eventually going to wipe out every person who doesn't trust in or believe in God. I was also raised to memorize Bible verses that completely forced me to disconnect from my body and from my intuition. Things like, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked, which comes from Jeremiah 17:9. Or lean not on your own understanding from Proverbs 3:5. These verses were really reinforcing the disconnect that was being taught to me, to the point that I was having to memorize these verses and recite them in Sunday school for prizes. As I disconnected from my body, I truly believed that it was actually sinful to rely on my inner voice to guide me, and that doing that would separate me from God or would displease God in some way. And so for my whole life, I had been taught to disconnect from my body, which Christians call denying the flesh. I had been taught to mistrust my own heart, which includes my intuition and my desires. And I had been taught to place my trust, my power, and my eternity in the hands of a patriarchal male God. I was guaranteed an eternity of fire and damnation if I didn't. And I learned and wholeheartedly believed in this evangelical doctrine from the tender age of 8. And when I say it was all I knew, I'm not kidding. My entire world revolved around Christianity until I was 31 years old. From 8 to age 31, I gave Jesus, the Bible, and the church authority over what I wore, who my friends were, who I dated, how I disciplined or punished my kids, how I spent my money, and how I behaved as a woman, a wife, and a mother. I was totally disconnected from myself, but I cannot in any way deny that I was very connected to the divine. And I would argue now that the divine is the self. But at that time, my understanding of the divine was that it was something outside of myself, but I have since integrated that belief. I truly enjoyed attending church and leading praise and worship with my husband, who was a worship pastor. I loved the sense of community that I felt in church. There was always a group of people who had my back and who I could rely on if I needed help. I have had genuine experiences of transcendence and pure worship of what I now know as the divine, even though at that time I thought it was the God of the Bible and Jesus. And at that time, Jesus was my life, and I loved him with my whole heart. In leaving the church and deconstructing and deconverting from that belief system, I couldn't ignore or deny those very real experiences. I knew they were real. Even if I couldn't trust in God the same way I once did, I still trusted in those feelings, which I find quite ironic considering I was taught not to trust my feelings. With all the indoctrination and manipulation and control of the church, I know that I had very sweet experiences with the divine. And I know they were real because they are one of the first things within myself that I trusted after Christianity. I didn't trust the Christian God anymore. I didn't trust the Bible, the doctrine, or the leadership. But when I communed with the being I knew as the divine, I trusted that. And that was where I started with my spiritual journey in 2017. So that was 7 years ago. It's 2024 right now. When I considered atheism, I wasn't concerned with scientifically or factually proving the existence of the divine, and that hasn't changed. And a lot of people who are into atheism or consider themselves atheists, it's very much based in like, there is no scientific proof that God is real. There is no factual evidence that there is a God or that there is a higher power. And so their atheism is based in that. And that's totally fine. Totally fine. But that wasn't what was important to me. Whether or not scientifically or factually I could prove the existence of a divine didn't matter to me. I don't need science to tell me that my totally sober experiences with the divine were real, because I trust what I felt and what I still feel. And I believe my body now. I won't gaslight my body or deny the reality of my feelings just because an external source contradicts them. Enough of that, right? My experiences with the divine was not manufactured. They were not drug induced. They were not preyed on me. They were not, some fit of energy that I had because I was in these environments where something like that was expected or desired. The experiences were real. They were felt experiences, and they came from deep within me, from that divine part of myself. Those experiences felt nourishing, and that feels true and right for me. I can break free from religious conditioning and also cultivate a heightened awareness and communion with the divine within and around me. If I had not been able to do that, I would have basically done the throwing the baby out with the bathwater thing. And it's really challenging to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, especially when you're in binary thinking patterns, which are so often present in people with trauma. But that's precisely what I would have done if I had abandoned Christianity or left Christianity behind and adopted a stance of disbelief in any form of higher power, creator, or source. And that didn't resonate with me in the slightest. So with uncertainty and trepidation, I began a journey to nourish myself spiritually in a way that Christianity never nourished me. I read books by spiritual teachers like Eckhart Tolle and Paramahansa Yogananda and others. I started to dabble with oracle card decks and crystals and having full moon ceremonies. When I would walk through the woods, I paid close attention to different plants and flowers, and I learned that I could intuitively hear and talk to them. I experienced doubt after doubt after doubt. And the Christian voices were still in my head, and they were shaking their judging fingers at me and tisking me for daring to learn about oneness, meditation, ancestors, oracle cards, magic rocks, and anything metaphysical. I'm only recently in my journey at a place where I can enter a metaphysical shop and an old familiar voice in my head doesn't whisper, "Careful, don't be deceived by this." That was a really common experience for me up until just recently. That voice doesn't feel like me. It actually feels like my husband's very judgmental paternal grandmother. She would shake her finger in disapproval at me if she were alive today, for sure. And she's not alive today. And I know that in spirit, she no longer holds those beliefs or rigid judgments of others. And while she was alive, I still loved her dearly, despite the fact that she would often tell me that I was sinning because I have a nose piercing. Today, my flavor of spirituality is not rooted in any one tradition. I may forever be skeptical of any one belief, practice, or tradition because I was so entrenched and indoctrinated into a specific belief and religion. So that may never, one way of believing or practicing spirituality may never feel right for me, and that's okay. What feels right for me is being able to combine, to mix, to match, to adopt what resonates, to discard what doesn't, and really create my own kind of flavor of spirituality. Another thing is that I have really struggled to find historical evidence about my ancestors' spiritual practices and rituals pre-colonization and pre-Christianity. So I experiment with different practices that resonate. And as long as they consistently feel right for me, they become part of my expressions of the divine. And I share all of this to say that you get to decide what nourishes you spiritually. And it's okay to try on different practices and experiment until you find what fits or doesn't fit you. It's also okay to identify as an atheist and still be spiritual. It might seem like an apparent contradiction, but adopting a spiritual practice can be as simple as observing your thoughts, observing the voice in your head, being present with your feelings and experiences, like watching birds fly by or like watching a stick drift down a river. It acknowledges that there is an unseen, unnamed part of you that is not your physical body and is not thoughts in your head. If calling it divine feels prickly to you, don't call it the divine. But the part is there nonetheless. There is still a part of you that is not your body and that is not your mind that can observe the experiences that you're having in your body and the thoughts you think in your head. That part, the unseen, unnamed observer, is the spirit, the soul, the consciousness, whatever you prefer to call it. If you are deconstructing or deconverting from any particular religion or ideology, it's normal to feel unsure and shaky as you learn to navigate the world with a different set of spiritual beliefs and values. But spirituality isn't limited to a set of beliefs. I am more uncertain than ever about what happens after death, about what role God plays in suffering around the world. There's so many questions that don't have answers now that I'm outside of Christianity. Because when I was in Christianity, I was taught that I had to have an answer for everything. And those answers were always found in the Bible, no matter what. But in nurturing and nourishing my spiritual self, I have come to accept the uncertainty. I no longer need it to feel safe. And it's also nice to not have anxiety anymore about hell or about my eternity. I believe that spiritual nourishment starts with awareness of the infinite part of myself, the soul, the spirit, the consciousness, whatever term you like to use for that part of you. We know that the human body contains more space than it does solid material or matter. We are more energy than we are matter. And for millennia, spiritual teachers have shared that we have bodies, but we are not our bodies. We are not our sensations. We are not our emotions. We can observe them, we can experience them, but they do not define who we are. And we have minds, but we are not our minds and we are not our thoughts. We can watch and observe what we think. So I refer to this infinite part of myself as my consciousness, my soul, or my spirit. I kind of use those terms interchangeably. You can call it whatever you want. You might prefer the term higher self, observer, the watcher, the authentic self, or something else that feels right for you. The important thing is that you understand that you are a spiritual being, and being spiritual doesn't have to mean being a believer or being Christian or being Muslim or even being religious at all. The consciousness, the soul, is the watcher of this meat suit that identifies as me. But my consciousness, my soul, is not identified with my body or anything about my physical form, including my identity, my gender, weight, race, ability, age, nothing. And maybe as you hear me saying that, there's a voice in your head who's objecting or who now has a different opinion about me. Maybe you have a story that identity and race and ability and age and all of that is really important parts of who we are, and that there is some sense of belonging or certainty to be found in those things. It's okay if you think that way. If you noticed a voice in your head that was judgmental, critical, or uncomfortable about me saying that you're a spiritual being, just notice it. There's space here for your discomfort. And when you can notice the thoughts without reacting to them, you are in awareness. You didn't have to invoke a deity. You didn't have to pray or meditate. You're just simply present and aware. There's a voice in my head that judges this person on this video for saying that my soul or my higher self doesn't identify with anything about me. Whether you have a particular spiritual practice or part of a spiritual lineage of yoga or anything else, whether you follow modern or ancient spiritual teachers, attend church, pray, or believe in God or not, you have a part of you that is not your body and is not your mind, and it can observe and notice and ask questions about everything you think, feel, say, and do. And I think that's pretty wonderful. As I mentioned earlier, this part is your conscious awareness or your soul or spirit or whatever you like to call it. When you're curiously observing the ramblings of your mind, not engaging, but curiously observing, you are in conscious awareness. When you notice and feel the sensations of your body without judgment, you are in conscious awareness. When you're curious about whatever is happening in or around you, you are in conscious awareness. You are observing without being in the story. You are observing without reacting. And awareness is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. And at first it feels weird. It feels weird to pause and sort of create space between you and whatever's happening, or space between your thoughts. But after a while and with commitment and practice, awareness gets easier and it feels more natural over time. Awareness is a spiritual practice that is the foundation of all trauma healing and personal development work, because conscious awareness allows us to witness our adaptive survival responses and use our agency to consciously choose who and what we desire to be. It means we're not mindlessly following the conditioning of our upbringing, our family of origin, society or culture, or the adaptive survival patterns themselves. Awareness is also really nourishing because it requires slowing down. When we go more slowly, we can be more present. We have time to observe and choose how to respond rather than react. We can see solutions or possibilities that we couldn't see before when we were in a reactive place. We are more open because we observe that our current perspective is just one of many and might be really limiting. Awareness is also a state of being. It doesn't require you to do anything or act on anything. It is simply present, observational, and curious. I also feel spacious when I'm observing and present with whatever is happening, instead of being caught up in the whirlwind of fast emotion that may or may not make sense. Awareness also invites acceptance. Accepting whatever is happening without focusing on the past or future is nourishing. It keeps you in the present moment. It allows you to conserve energy rather than wasting it on worrying about things you can't control. You can notice that you desire an outcome without being attached to or identified with that outcome. And then if what you wanted doesn't happen, you don't make it mean anything about you, your life, or your relationships. To quote my friend Mark, you can just be in a state of presence where that's just what's happening. But if you are new to spirituality, if you're coming out of high control religion, but wanting to maintain your spiritual roots, it can be difficult to know like what to do, which practices should I do, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to share some really nourishing spiritual practices with you. The first one that I want to share, you can roll your eyes all you want to at me, is meditation. I know it can bring up a lot of discomfort for people. I often have found that if you are in a nervous system state of really high anxiety or freeze, meditation may not be the best tool for you. Meditation can sometimes make it worse. If you believe that sitting in meditation is supposed to feel peaceful or transcendental or out of body, you're going to be sorely disappointed. You're not doing it wrong if these things don't happen, and there's nothing wrong if these things do happen. People who practice meditation daily have sometimes powerful experiences that they struggle to put into words. But the point of meditation isn't to do or feel or experience anything. Meditation is just about being present with whatever is happening, whatever you're thinking, whatever you're feeling, you're just watching it and noticing it. That's it. When you have thoughts during meditation, you haven't failed at meditating. Can you notice the thoughts without being attached to them? If you notice a voice in your head, can you be curious and present with it? If your thoughts start wandering to your to-do list, your next meeting, or the argument you had with your partner yesterday, can you release any futuristic thought or past thought and return to the present moment? If you can do that over and over and over, even in the same session, you're meditating. That's all it is. As I mentioned, if you're in a highly dysregulated state, like the fight, flight, freeze energy of OCD, intrusive thoughts, and catastrophizing, I don't recommend meditation for you. I have observed in clients and in myself that meditating during those hyper-aroused states often fuels the fire, so to speak. In the nervous system, meditation requires accessing a state of stillness. The state of stillness is actually a secondary state in the nervous system, and it's a combination of the safety of the ventral vagal state and the immobilization of the dorsal vagal state. So if you're in fight, flight, or freeze energy, you have access to neither safety nor immobilization. So I recommend discharging those energies first through embodiment or other movement, and then moving your body in a way that allows you to be present with and move through those difficult states. Another way to nourish yourself through spiritual practice that's pretty easy is drawing oracle cards. Cards are a regular part of my spiritual practice. When I was new to using oracle cards, I tried to use them to confirm, deny, or predict something that would happen in my life. I definitely do not recommend trying to use oracle cards to soothe your anxiety or make something happen that you're feeling particularly attached to or wanting to control. I recognized that I was not developing a spiritual practice when I was doing that. I was using oracle cards from a place of dysregulation and as a means to avoid feeling uncertainty. Do not recommend. So that's my caution to you if you decide to try oracle cards or tarot cards. Use your intuition and your discernment when you're drawing cards. If something doesn't resonate, it's probably not the card for you. If a particular card brings up fear, or you think it's confirming something you fear, such as maybe I'm supposed to break up with my partner, it's okay to put the cards away or draw a different card without getting carried away in the what ifs or the story or the fear. Oracle cards are not predictors of the future, nor should they be used as literal advice unless they resonate and feel true for you in a non-fearful way. I began developing relationships with my own spirit guides through using oracle cards. I have a few decks that I regularly use. I'll link to those below so that you can check them out. And the more regulated my nervous system is, the less likely I am to get upset or feel anxious about the meaning of the cards I draw. Another one of my favorite spiritual practices is simply being in nature, because we're part of nature. When I'm in nature, I am returning to a natural state of being. This is a huge piece of my own spiritual practice. When I go long periods of time without being in nature, I begin to feel disconnected from myself and from my purpose. And that's because there's no separation between me and the natural world. The lessons that I learn in nature, such as the parable of the spider's web, which I shared in the first video in this series, teach me more quickly than anything I can read in a book or learn in therapy or learn through an in-person conversation. The symbolism of the seasons, the cycles of birth and death, even watching chickens or insects or sitting under a cedar tree can highlight something I've been stuck in or show me an unconscious pattern with no words at all. The earth has been teaching me with spider webs since 2020, and I shared one of those stories in the first video of the Nourish Your Nervous System series, but I want to share another one. So in the summer of 2020, I was on a plant medicine journey and walking through the woods with my husband, David. And in the midst of fractalized rainbows on the edges of everything, I happened to notice a dead dragonfly that was caught in a spider's web. I was mesmerized by this. There was no spider. The dragonfly was totally dead. The spider's web was all torn up, but I was still mesmerized and I began crying. I felt connected to that dead dragonfly, like there was an unspoken understanding or resonance between us. And my husband asked me if I was okay. And I said, yeah, I'm okay. I just see myself in this dragonfly. Look at how much this web is ripped up. You can tell the dragonfly fought really hard trying to get free, but the harder it fought, the more stuck it got. Duh. I learned the single greatest lesson about surrender from that dead dragonfly in the spider web. The more I resist, the more stuck I become. That lesson has never left me. So when I feel stuck, I get curious and I ask myself, what am I resisting? As soon as I can sense what I'm resisting, I bring that into conscious awareness and I surrender whatever I'm trying to control or fight or fix. And this is a part of my spiritual practice. It's not shiny. It's not sexy. It doesn't look like, a kale vegan goddess in Bali in a bathtub surrounded with flowers. But this is the real practice of spirituality, not the social media version of it. Your nervous system is like a radio antenna. So connecting with our consciousness, whether you call that soul, higher self, true self, whatever, is a necessary part of nourishing our nervous systems. Because intuitive messages, the things that we know but can't explain how we know them, come from our conscious awareness. You know what your intuition says because of your nervous system. Your nervous system is like a radio antenna. If you can remember driving in cars when you were a kid and having to turn a dial to find a radio station, or having to turn the dial of a TV with the bunny ears to tune into a station, then you know what I'm talking about. Your nervous system is highly sensitive to frequency and energy. You can call that intuition, downloads, spiritual messages, clairsentience, messages from God or spirit or source or whatever, but you wouldn't be able to receive any of it if you didn't have a nervous system. You can feel sensations, which are your body's messages, and interpret those messages as intuitive knowings or nudges. Nervous system dysregulation is the static that fucks with your ability to pick up on, hear, and interpret intuitive messages. Just like when you're turning the dial in an old car to find a radio station, you're turning through a lot of static and interference. It's the same with the nervous system. A more regulated nervous system, a more nourished nervous system has less interference, and the messages come through more clearly and cleanly. Maybe you have a voice in your head that's starting to create a story about this. Maybe the voice is saying, but my nervous system is crazy dysregulated, so I must have lots of work to do before I can hear my intuition. And I want to reassure you, that's just a story, and it isn't necessarily true at all. You have an opportunity to clearly hear your intuition every time you are aware and present. Every moment is an opportunity to be in conscious awareness. So having access to clear, intuitive messages feels luxuriously spacious and nourishing to me. I believe this is because I'm not outsourcing my physical, emotional, mental, or spiritual wellness now that my nervous system's radio station comes through loud and clear without the interference and static of my former dysregulation. I am well resourced with my own truth, authenticity, agency, power, and embodiment because my nervous system is nourished. And that includes nourishing the spiritual part of myself. Awareness has been the single greatest contributor to all of the transformations, healing, and authenticity I have experienced so far. It works better than nervous system tools, and it is the springboard for facing my adaptive survival patterns. On a more practical level, however, I want to talk about energetic hygiene and how important it is to maintain our clean energy. Empaths and highly sensitive people will get what I'm saying here, but this applies to everyone. The energies of your home, the places you visit or vacation, your workplaces, family members and friends, and public places can all have a profound effect on your nervous system, for better or for worse. The energies of these places and people can add to the load your nervous system already carries. You may be energetically sensitive if you experience overstimulation or overwhelm in public places, if you feel feelings that don't seem like they belong to you, or if you tend to mimic the moods, affect, or energies of others you're around. If you've ever walked into a building or a room and had an immediate sense of unease or fear, or as if someone or something is watching you, this proves you're sensitive to energy. And similarly, if you've ever passed someone on a street and you've had a feeling about them, you are sensing energy that may or may not resonate with you. Likewise, when you come across someone on social media, maybe someone like me, and you feel an instant attraction or resonance, that's also energetic sensitivity. And just like we have to take responsibility for our nervous systems, we also have to take responsibility for our energy and have energetic boundaries. When we work with and clear energy from people and places, we can reduce the load our nervous systems carry, and that creates more flexibility and capacity in our bodies. And it also helps us to hear those intuitive messages more clearly. So energetic hygiene is spiritual hygiene. It's a spiritual practice. So here are some of my tried and true practices for keeping my own energy field clean. You've probably heard of smudging. That's my first one. This is an ancient practice that is used worldwide. It's where dried plant matter is rolled up and tied into a thick stick, commonly called a smudging stick, bundle, or wand. Native people have used plants like sage and Palo Santo for smudging. And if you can source these things from a reputable place, use them. If, though, you would like to connect with plants your ancestors would likely have used for smudging in their culture, that's lovely too. In our house, we smudge with dried mugwort because this is a plant that I can forage locally And my Scottish Highlander and Western European ancestors would likely have used mugwort, not white sage or Palo Santo. You can also smudge with other plants such as cedar leaves and lavender. Another way that you can cleanse your energy is by receiving Reiki. Reiki for me is like scrubbing my energetic hard drive. It clears my chakras, it clears energy blocks. It's beautiful energy work because it can be done from a distance. My husband is a level 3 master Reiki healer, and he gives me Reiki at home or even whenever I'm traveling. And it really just kind of sweeps up and clears out stagnant, blocked, heavy energy from my field. There's another practice that I'd love to teach you called the bubble practice. And this is a really great way of staying in your own sovereign energy. When you're in a room alone, visualize your energy surrounding your body like a bubble. If you've ever seen the movie The Wizard of Oz and you remember the scene where Glinda the Good Witch floats in on a bubble, that's kind of like what I like to imagine whenever I do this. So as you're imagining your own energy surrounding you like a bubble, you may feel warm or tingly, or your ears may even ring. You're inside this bubble. This is your beautiful, sacred energy. It's all yours. Maybe it's a particular color when you picture this bubble of energy. How does it feel when you're inside this bubble of energy? Get acquainted with how your energy feels. Many of my clients have described their energetic bubbles as warm, tingly, pleasant, and peaceful. Now, start to test how your energy reacts to other people. So you could imagine your partner walking into the room as you're inside your energetic bubble. Notice how your bubble responds. When you're done noticing how your energy responds to your partner, you can reset your bubble by visualizing them leaving the room and your bubble returning to its normal, warm, pleasant, tingly state. Then you can try this again with various people in your life, resetting your bubble after each person leaves the room. I once had a client who noticed that when she visualized her children coming into the room, her bubble expanded to include them. But when her mother walked into the room, her bubble became dented on that side. Other clients have told me that one side of their bubble turns hard or black when they imagine certain people approaching them. Some have experienced their bubbles shrinking in the presence of their parents, exes, and coworkers. Whatever happens, it's just data. It's just information for you to note because your energy clearly responds to others' energies. It may be helpful for you to journal as you do the bubble practice. And I encourage you, if you're new to energy work, to do this practice daily for a while to develop your intuition and your energy reading skills. I hope that as you cultivate your spirituality and you take care of your spiritual body, that you are open and curious. Anytime you notice that you are feeling particularly attached to a belief or even defensive of a belief, that is a clue. That's just data. It's nothing to be judgmental about or to feel ashamed of, but it's a clue that you're starting to drift into ego territory and you're not really in that higher consciousness territory. But everybody drifts into ego territory. Nobody doesn't do that. So it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you or that you're doing it wrong. You really can't do it wrong. Your spirituality is a sacred thing for you personally. You don't have to do it the way that anyone else tells you to, particularly if the way that they're telling you to do spirituality is controlling, brainwashing, manipulative, gaslighting, or bypassing the very real pain that you may be experiencing or that the world is experiencing. Thank you so much for joining me for this 7th video in the Nourish Your Nervous System series, all about nourishing yourself spiritually. In the next video, video number 8, I'm going to talk about how we can nourish our minds. And you definitely don't want to miss that video because I have a couple of hot takes to share in it. If you would like to check out my entire book, Nourish Your Nervous System, there is a link below this video to click on and grab that as an instant download ebook and as an audiobook. Or you can type in the link lindseylockett.com/nourish. It's just $20. And also stay tuned for my upcoming videos. We still have 5 more to go. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end of this episode. Stay in touch with me by joining my email list at lindseylockett.com/email. And feel free to follow along on Instagram at I am Lindsey Lockett. Finally, you can check out all of my offerings, including courses, private coaching, and workshops on my website at lindseylockett.com.